Good afternoon, and thank you so much for this opportunity to share a few thoughts with you today.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Karabo-Maya. As we've said, this is Leyya. So just some context, we had our bios to start off with, but then realized we were just going to be repeating. So this is our title page, and I'll move on. So my ideas around possibility, youth, and dreaming in South Africa were cemented after the reflections of the 29th of May, 2024, which marked South Africa's 7th democratic elections. This was the second time that I've casted my vote in national elections, and for many of my contemporaries, it was also the second or third electoral season. The debates that emerged from these elections highlighted for me what possibility truly means in the South African context. As Wendy said, my own PhD focuses on the experiences of such youth in post-liberation societies in Southern Africa, specifically in Mozambique and South Africa. Many of us experience our nation as a cloud rather than a rainbow, as declared by our former president, Nelson Mandela. There's a sense of sitting on the edge of liberation, as South Africa is praised globally for our constitution. We're at the pinnacle of morality, yet the everyday lives of South Africans pushes us further and further away from being able to believe in this. Yet, Leyya and I still argue that South Africa is at the precipice of change. We've gone through cycles of being at the precipice since democracy in 1994, but there's a breakdown in certainties in the everyday, which makes us question what we're really working towards. However, change is still happening in spaces such as the University of the Witwatersrand, which is one of the biggest universities on the continent, and the University of Johannesburg, which is one of the fastest growing universities on the continent. This is the result of possibility being possible. For us, this stems from the recognition of the self in the other, and understanding that in order for possibility to be possible, we need to find ways to work together. Are we romanticizing a failed liberation state? Maybe. We don't know what we're trying for, although we're constantly working towards it. This is seen in countries throughout the global south, from South Africa to Brazil, from India to Argentina, who've all endured the weight of colonialism, imperialism, and economic exploitation. When I speak to my Brazilian colleagues and friends, I'm constantly struck by how many similarities we share, even though we're thousands of kilometers apart. The historical threads that bind us, from the legacies of colonial domination to the struggle for autonomy and dignity, are undeniable, showing that the global south is not only geographic, but ideological, historical, and political. Yet we must ask, how often do we find ourselves labeled as the global south without recognition of these shared histories? How often do we see the peripheralization of the global south? The struggles of the global south, marked by the historical weight of colonialism and ongoing economic exploitation, create an environment where not only entire nations are at the periphery, but so too are our youth. But we all need to note that there is no society without youth dreaming, and without careful consideration, these dreams will disappear, as we do not have space to dream, hope, and think about what is possible, when the majority of South Africa is worried about making it to tomorrow. And so thinking about 20 years from now is too far off. But Leyya will take you through some ways in which we and others around us work with what we feel is possible and how we create further possibilities.
I'd like to begin by discussing the concept of mythology, specifically the mythology of possibility. By this, I mean the narratives that we create and internalize about what is or isn't achievable. These mythologies are critical to understand because they shape not only individual aspirations, but also collective frameworks of action. To ground this, I define mythology broadly as a system of shared narratives that explain and give meaning to the world. It often pertains to the epistemologies that we privilege, the frameworks we employ, and the aspirations that we dare to envision. There's a particular urgency in critically examining the mythology of possibility because it's inherently political. The stakes are high. The mythologies that we adopt can either reinforce oppressive structures or challenge and transform them. In South Africa, for example, our positionality, race, gender, socioeconomic status, and how we're positioned within the global south all significantly determine the narratives of possibility that are available to us. It's important to note that when we speak of the global south, as Karabo-Maya said, it's as much a geographical reality as it is an ideology, operationalized in numerous ways to shape power dynamics, opportunities, and perceptions. This mythology around the global south itself is essential to interrogate. Specifically, the terminology that we use should center on acknowledging shared histories and interconnected struggles rather than perpetuating an us versus them binary. This shift is ideologically significant as it moves towards solidarity and mutual recognition, challenging divisive narratives that often underpin these existing narratives and mythologies. How society perceives us and how we are read profoundly impacts what we're told is within the realm of possibility. For many students in South Africa, especially in the context of a young democracy, the dominant mythology tells them two things. Firstly, that they should either be grateful simply to exist within these spaces or strive to be exceptional to justify their presence. There's really an allowance for the in-between, the possibility of being good enough or simply present and engaged. This mythology is not only limiting, but political. It's imposed, not inherently true, and often operates to sustain systemic inequalities. Yet many of us are living testaments to challenging these myths. We didn't fully accept what we were told was or wasn't possible or available to us. This interrogation of mythology extends into the academy in various ways. In terms of research methodologies, our approaches have always been experimental, attentive to difference and nuance, and intentionally stake a claim for a different narrative about what is possible within the academy. The topics we choose to research aren't neutral. They carry their own stakes. And for me, the act of researching is itself a form of activism, an effort to rewrite the mythology of what scholars like me can or can't do. Building community within the academy is another essential way that we challenge these narratives. Our relationship to each other and the idea of community is transformative. Community is more than a support system. It's a radical tool to uplift, share opportunities, and create spaces where none previously existed. We've decided that there's room for us, and where there isn't room, we'll make it. This applies to lecturing, presenting, and the shared labor of being in academia. There are certain spaces that necessitate individual effort, but many more demand a communal approach. Working in isolation is not a sustainable future, and communities where possibility thrives. Unfortunately, many of our peers entering the academy are falling into the trap of exceptionalism, that pervasive mythology that isolates individuals and pits them against one another. We see it as both unsustainable and alienating. Instead, our activism and academic practice focus on holding space for others, no matter their struggles or perspectives. This is about listening and creating space where people feel supported and heard. This interrogation of mythologies and this effort to create space is political and extends into all aspects of how we do and enact scholarship and pedagogy. As scholars of color, as members of the Global South, we know how often the deck is stacked against us. Yet there's also something profoundly exciting about engaging with the possibility of rewriting these myths. The question is not only what we want to be possible, but how we go about creating those possibilities, collectively and intentionally. We've decided to structure our talk today in a way that reflects our working relationship, which has unfolded over numerous conversations that are attentive and committed to holding each other in care and love. Today, we bring you into this practice. And on that note, Karabo-Maya, a key theme that we've discussed is the difference between building a community and creating one. And this tension is significant. What does it mean to build a community versus to create one?
It is crucial as we enter into any space to recognize that each of us arrives as a whole person with our own experiences, ideas, and importantly, our own care practices. When I speak of care practices, I'm referring to them not simply as acts of nurturing, but as vital creative strategies that enable us to engage meaningfully in the work that we are doing together. In the context of building a community, it is not about starting from scratch or pretending we all come in as a blank slate. Instead, we're coming with our foundations already laid, with our personal histories, struggles, and ambitions that shape how we contribute. As a colleague in my department always says to her students, don't leave yourself at the door when you walk into a lecture. This resonates deeply for me as I see it applying not only to the classroom, but to all the spaces we inhabit, the academy, our communities, and beyond. When we enter these spaces, we bring with us the entirety of who we are, and that's precisely the point. We are not merely filling roles. We're engaging with the world through the lens of our own lived experiences, the struggles of our histories, and the contexts that shape us. Had Leyya and I met earlier in our academic journeys, perhaps we would have been in the process of creating ourselves, still figuring everything out. But by the time we crossed paths, we were already on distinct journeys within academia, knowing where we wanted to go, but still figuring out how and with whom we wanted to go there. I remember being an undergraduate, still navigating my third year, while she was a graduate student, already a few steps ahead. My direction, solidified by the Mellon Mayes Fellowship, was clear. but I was still navigating my fears and uncertainties. And it was precisely at that crossroads where I began to see the importance of community. It became clear that I didn't want to navigate this journey alone. Building that community isn't an easy task, but it is also a necessity for survival, for thriving. This is where the radical care practices come in. We can't simply push forward alone. We need each other to heal, to grow, to survive in these systems that are stacked against us, as Leyya said. The more I grew sure of my path, the more I understood the necessity of being part of a community that would nurture and support that growth. And then when we met, it felt like an opportunity to learn from someone already ahead. Someone who could show me not only how to avoid mistakes, but also how to recover from them when they inevitably happen. I'm reminded here of the discussion around the master-apprentice relationship that often dominates our academic structures. But we've worked together. We've moved beyond this hierarchical top-down approach to knowledge sharing. Instead, we have intentionally always engaged each other as equals, sharing our thoughts and experiences freely, recognizing that we all have something valuable to contribute. It is in this egalitarian collaborative approach that we find our strengths and our resilience. In a world that often devalues our knowledge and contributions, this practice of mutual care is not only radical, it is essential to our survival and success. On that note, Leyya, could you speak more concretely on what some of our care practices are and how they've unfolded or developed in our building of community?
So radical care is exactly that, radical. It demands practices and conversations often unseen or undervalued within the academy. It's in the act of introducing these moments of pause as our scholarly journeys unfold and asking ourselves what we need in these moments of pressure, from undergraduate straight through to professorship, and then holding space for others when they encounter those same challenges. It extends into our teaching practices, embedding care into the courses that we design, making room for vulnerability, and fostering environments of trust and honesty in often precarious academic spaces. Radical care is radical because it disrupts the norm and because it rejects the mythology of solitary brilliance in favor of shared effort and collective upliftment. There's also a tension here in the act of creating a culture and network of trust. This work requires an influx of resources, transparency, and openness. It involves intentionally shifting the paradigm and showing that collaboration is not a sign of weakness, but a source of strength. It isn't cheating to build ideas together, it's revolutionary. Together, we have consistently spoken about what isn't usually addressed, and we push ourselves to name what's left unspoken. Two thoughts stand out for me at this moment. First, there's this idea of language and articulation. Today, we've purposefully chosen to express ourselves in a way that reflects the truths of our relationship. This means that while our content is always grounded in rigorous academic frameworks of interrogation and decoloniality, when we talk about our intellectual partnership, creative practices, and artistic theorizing, we haven't used language or jargon that would exclude others from the dialogue. This is an intervention that we believe is important in countering the inaccessibility that often comes with ways of knowing and doing knowledge production in academia. The way we've chosen to express these truths is crucial. It asserts our agency as women of color, young scholars, and people in academia. When I recall past conversations that weren't for public presentation, they're always specific, concrete, and unabstracted. Even with all the work we've done and our ongoing commitment to transparency and iterative practices, there are still certain aspects that we've chosen to leave in the shadows or in our undercommons. And I wonder if the struggle is not merely about clarity, but a refusal politics, whether it reflects an unconscious decision not to articulate, as we don't often fully perceive the space of the academy as safe enough for that type of vulnerability.
Here we need to make a crucial distinction between knowledge production and knowledge reproduction. For too long, scholars in the Global South have been relegated to reproducing knowledge created elsewhere, often shaped by frameworks that do not reflect our realities. Knowledge production, however, is about creating new understandings, challenging dominant narratives, and asserting our agency in defining what knowledge is and who gets to create it. This is especially vital for us in countries and spaces where our histories and innovations have been overlooked. We must actively reshape systems of knowledge to reflect our lived experiences and futures. Equally important is the inclusion of young people in this process. As emerging scholars, we must not only consume knowledge, but contribute to its creation, ensuring a new a more inclusive and dynamic academic landscape that reflects the voices and contributions of the Global South. Many of us are actively doing this by producing new knowledge with our wording, our histories, our framing. I would argue that these constant cycles of learning show our commitment to theory to practice cycles of knowledge. So for you, what is the link between building community and constant learning?
I think I think embracing theory to practice as a strategy for doing scholarship is crucial here. Throughout our journeys, we've navigated our phases and identities in community, even if not always in the same ways. There are links between research, teaching, academic service, and the work that we do in personal spaces as well. For example, firstly, we've both been students together. We've shared what scholarship means to us as students undertaking degrees and researching, continuously learning and defining what scholarship is in experimental ways. This was built in community, even when that community felt sparse at first. Secondly, we've been lecturers together. We've found what pedagogy means to us individually and collectively, creating experimental and impactful ways to link theory to practice. It has been deeply fulfilling to bring our whole selves into the classroom and have students see that, to remind them that they too belong and matter in these spaces, showing them that academia isn't just for a privileged few, but that it can reflect the diversity of those teaching and lecturing, and that this is an act of care and transformation. And finally, we've navigated the gaze of the academy together. Throughout all of this, we've experienced the constant and unrelenting gaze of the academy, a gaze that both scrutinizes and shapes. Together, we've found ways to negotiate visibility, opacity, and accountability to making possible what we strive for. To bounce ideas off one another and to hold each other accountable is not only practical, but necessary for joy, resilience, and success in academic life. This iterative process has allowed us to continuously reflect, revise, and redefine what success and fulfillment means for us. It's also underscored the difficulty of finding and sustaining community in academia. But once we built a springboard between the two of us, it became easier to welcome others into this space and expand that network. These cycles of community and collaboration, building theory, practicing it, and constantly learning how to make spaces more accessible and inclusive are intentional acts of resistance. These cycles of practice remind us that silos may be common in academia, but they are not inevitable. Reciprocity ensures that even in challenging times, we hold each other accountable in the healthiest of ways. In doing all of this, we see the undercurrent of the academy's gaze, ever present and strategic in making us navigate what remains unsaid. This tension is crucial to our praxis, the visible and the unspoken coexisting, reflecting the complex strategies of working within and against institutional norms.
As Leyya has said, in our work, we've often followed a process that feels quite intuitive. We talk through a chapter, a section, or presentation while the other person writes it down, back and forth, constantly refining our ideas together. This practice has become second nature to us, a default. But as we all sit here presenting in this academic space, I find myself questioning, is this the kind of thing we're meant to discuss at an academic conference? Is it even academic enough? Yet after reflecting on it, I've come to a realization. This process, the collaboration and exchange, is precisely what has carried us through academia. It is what has allowed us to navigate the MA, PhD, and employment journeys. It may not fit neatly in traditional academic molds, but it is absolutely central to our scholarship and to how we have persevered. This brings me to a final series of questions I think are vital for all of us to reflect upon. Have we simply made this up, created a system of support that doesn't exist in traditional academic spaces? Or are others also doing this, even if we don't always see it? I know many young scholars are working alone, navigating this path without the support of a community. So I wonder, have we romanticized the academic journey? Or more importantly, are we challenging the very systems that have historically excluded young people, women, and people of color from meaningfully participating in knowledge production? It is essential, especially for us as young scholars, to recognize the role of collaboration in how we engage with knowledge. Too often, academic structures do not know what to do with us. They do not actively include us, nor do they provide spaces for us to shape the very knowledge systems that we are a part of. This is why we must continue to reshape these systems, to move beyond traditional academic structures that isolate rather than include. True knowledge production must be collective, inclusive, and must allow young voices to be heard, not just as recipients of knowledge, but as creators of it. We are the ones who will define the future of scholarship, but only if we insist on making spaces for ourselves and for each other. In doing so, we can hold ourselves accountable. Accountability is not just about checking if we are practicing what we preach regarding radical care. It is about ensuring that our actions align with what we say, that we create systems that support us and support others. The care we offer each other in our academic journey is an essential survival strategy. It is how we thrive, how we persist, and how we push back against systems that seek to marginalize and exclude us.
We've been having this conversation for years, presenting different iterations of this paper at various conferences across various continents, and speaking about this topic in a range of spaces, academic and not. The necessary work of survival, both in academia and life more broadly, requires thoughtful and deep care. This is a conversation that must continue. There isn't a singular answer as our needs evolve over time and our care practices change as we grow. Engaging in these discussions intentionally and compassionately and weaving it through our scholarship and pedagogical practices allows us to collectively imagine the possibilities that we have yet to even think of.
I think it is clear that for us, this is not just an academic experience, but an academic experiment, but a lived experience, one that evolves and shapes our understanding of survival within academia. We've been actively navigating these spaces, exploring how creative strategies and radical practices intertwine to form a cycle of continuous transformation and knowledge sharing. As we contribute to decolonizing knowledge production, we are also building a sustainable community of and for young scholars, particularly in the Global South, where transformation is both urgent and possible. We challenge ourselves to ask critical questions. What does it mean to be presenting in these spaces? And why aren't more academics sharing their stories of survival and care? We hope to have a dialogue that not only reflects our struggles, but also encourages others to bring their creative and radical practices to the forefront. How do these practices show up in your communities, and how can we collectively keep this cycle of survival and transformation alive? We invite you all to reflect on these questions with us, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts and experiences. Thank you.